November 22nd, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The mess hall had been decorated with paper turkeys and autumn leaves cut from construction paper by American guards who felt strange celebrating Thanksgiving with prisoners. 200 German women, members of the Wehrmacht's Helferinnenkorps Auxiliary Corps, sat at long tables staring at plates they couldn't believe were real. Each plate held slices of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce, and a roll with butter. Real butter. The aroma alone was overwhelming. Many of these women hadn't seen meat in months. In the final year of the Reich, their rations had consisted of black bread mixed with sawdust, watery turnip soup, and occasionally a potato. Now, as American officers encouraged them to eat, several women began to cry, not from sadness but from the cognitive dissonance of being fed a feast by the enemy they had been taught to hate. Greta Schneider, a 23-year-old former radio operator from Munich, would later recall this moment as the day she understood Germany had lost more than a war. She had lost her understanding of the world itself. The Americans, who were supposed to be brutal victors, were serving her turkey. The journey to this moment had begun in the chaotic final months of World War II. As the Reich collapsed, Wehrmacht auxiliary women fled westward, desperate to surrender to Americans or British rather than Soviets. These women had served in non-combat roles: radio operators, clerks, nurses, searchlight operators. But they wore military uniforms and fell under military jurisdiction. When American forces captured them in Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia in April and May 1945, the women expected the worst. Nazi propaganda had filled their heads with horror stories about what happened to German women who fell into enemy hands. The reality was bureaucratic processing, medical screening, delousing, and transport to prisoner of war camps in France, Britain, and eventually the United States. The first shock came during transport. American guards treated them not as dangerous enemies, but as a logistical problem to be processed. There was no violence, no degradation, just forms and lines and medical examinations. When they arrived at camps in the American South and Midwest, the women found themselves in facilities that, while clearly prisons, bore no resemblance to concentration camps or the brutal Soviet gulags they had heard about. The barracks had heat. The latrines functioned. There were showers with hot water and soap, real soap that smelled of flowers, not the harsh lye soap they had used in Germany when they had any soap at all. But nothing prepared them for American food. The contrast with their final years in Germany was so stark that many thought it was temporary, a trick, or that they were somehow receiving American military rations by mistake. In Germany, by 1945, the food situation had become catastrophic. The official ration for German civilians had dropped to 1,000 calories per day, barely enough to prevent starvation. In practice, many received far less. The bread was adulterated with sawdust and ground chestnuts. Meat was a distant memory. Butter hadn't been seen in months. People boiled grass and tree bark to make soup that provided bulk if not nutrition. The women who had served in the Wehrmacht had received slightly better rations than civilians, but by early 1945, even military rations had collapsed. Many had watched their weight drop dangerously, their monthly cycles stop, their hair thin and fall out, classic signs of malnutrition. Then they arrived in America, and the mess halls served 3 meals a day. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee with real cream. Lunch might be soup, sandwiches, and fruit. Dinner featured meat, vegetables, potatoes, and dessert. The quantities seemed impossible. A German POW's daily ration in an American camp exceeded 3,000 calories, more than double what German civilians were receiving and far more than what the prisoners themselves had eaten in years.
The Geneva Convention required captors to feed prisoners the same rations as their own troops, and America complied meticulously. The result was that German prisoners in America ate better than they had eaten since before the war began in 1939.
Thanksgiving 1945 represented the culmination of this abundance. American camp commanders, many of whom had never dealt with female prisoners before, wanted to demonstrate American values. Thanksgiving, they believed, embodied what America stood for: gratitude, plenty, generosity, and family. Orders came down from the War Department that German POWs, male and female, would receive traditional Thanksgiving dinners. This created logistical challenges. Turkey had to be procured, enough to feed thousands of prisoners across dozens of camps. Cooking facilities designed for basic meals had to produce elaborate holiday feasts. But America's industrial capacity, which had overwhelmed the Wehrmacht in combat, now overwhelmed German prisoners with food. At Camp Ruston, the German women filed into the mess hall uncertain what to expect. They had been told about American holidays, but understood little about Thanksgiving's significance. When they saw the loaded plates, several refused to sit down, convinced this was some kind of test or trap. American Guards and Red Cross representatives had to encourage them repeatedly. "It's Thanksgiving. Everyone eats today. Please, sit." When they finally tasted the turkey, the emotional reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Women who had maintained stoic composure through defeat, capture, and imprisonment broke down sobbing. The turkey was tender, moist, flavored with herbs. The mashed potatoes were creamy with real butter. The cranberry sauce was sweet and tart. Every bite contradicted years of Nazi propaganda about American weakness and cruelty. Ilse Hoffman, a former Luftwaffe auxiliary from Berlin, later described the experience in a letter to her sister. "I took one bite of the turkey and began crying. I couldn't stop, not because I was sad, but because I couldn't understand. We were the enemy. We had fought against them. Our bombs had killed their soldiers. Yet they gave us this feast." The American woman serving me, a Red Cross volunteer, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "It's okay, honey. Everyone should have a good meal on Thanksgiving." I didn't know what Thanksgiving was, but I knew in that moment that everything we had been told about America was a lie. The psychological impact went beyond the immediate gratitude for food. These women had been raised in Nazi Germany, indoctrinated in the superiority of German culture and the weakness of American society. They had been taught that Americans were soft, materialistic, and racially degenerate. The reality they encountered demolished these beliefs systematically. The Americans who guarded them were not weak. They were confident, well-fed, and in possession of industrial might that Germany could never match. The trucks, the supplies, the abundance of everything from soap to cigarettes to food, it all testified to a society that functioned at a level Germany had never achieved even at its peak. The Thanksgiving dinner became a symbol of this larger revelation. In Germany, special meals had disappeared years ago. By 1944, even Christmas dinners consisted of whatever could be scrounged, perhaps a small piece of meat if one was lucky, more often just potatoes and cabbage. The idea that America, while fighting a global war, could afford to give its prisoners elaborate holiday feasts was incomprehensible. It suggested reserves of wealth and resources that made Germany's total war mobilization look pathetic by comparison. Not all the women reacted with tears. Some responded with anger, feeling humiliated by American generosity. How dare the enemy feed them better than their own government had? Others felt guilt. Their families in Germany were starving while they ate turkey in Louisiana or Texas.
Some wrote letters home describing the food and had them censored because camp authorities worried that descriptions of American abundance might harm morale among Germans still suffering in the ruins. A few women refused to eat, staging small protests, insisting they would not accept charity from the enemy. But hunger and the smell of roasted turkey broke most resistance within hours. The American camp staff observed these reactions with a mixture of sympathy and incomprehension. Many guards were young men who had grown up during the Depression, who remembered genuine hunger. Yet even Depression-era America had more food security than wartime Germany. The contrast highlighted the vast economic gulf between the societies. The Red Cross volunteers, many of them women whose own sons were serving overseas or had died in combat, treated the German prisoners with a compassion that confused the prisoners themselves. "Why are you nice to us?" one prisoner asked a volunteer. "Because you're hungry and I can help," came the reply. This simple humanitarianism, divorced from politics or ideology, was foreign to women raised in a totalitarian system.
In the weeks following Thanksgiving, the effects of proper nutrition became visible. The prisoners gained weight. Their hair regained its luster. Their menstrual cycles returned. Color came back to faces that had been sallow and gray. American medical officers documented this transformation with clinical precision, noting that prisoners who arrived malnourished returned to a healthy body weight within 2 to 3 months on American rations. This physical recovery paralleled a psychological one. The women began to accept that their captivity was not the nightmare they had anticipated, but an unexpected sanctuary from the consequences of Germany's defeat. Christmas 1945 brought another elaborate meal, reinforcing the pattern. By then, the prisoners had adjusted to American abundance. They no longer cried at the sight of meat, though many still felt profound gratitude. Letters written home in late 1945 and early 1946, when mail service was restored, described conditions that German civilians could barely believe. "We have heat, hot water, 3 meals a day with meat, and the Americans give us Red Cross packages with chocolate and cigarettes," wrote one prisoner. Her sister in Hamburg, living in a bombed-out basement and surviving on 800 calories a day, read the letter and felt bitter resentment that prisoners lived better than citizens. Repatriation began in 1946, and the women returned to a Germany that bore no resemblance to the nation they had left. Cities were rubble. Millions were homeless. Food remained scarce. The contrast with their treatment in America was stark and disturbing. Many women found themselves defending their captors to their families and friends. "The Americans treated us well," they would say, and be met with disbelief or anger. How could the enemy have been kind while Germans suffered? The cognitive dissonance was national, not just individual.
Decades later, historians conducting oral history projects interviewed surviving female POWs about their experiences. The Thanksgiving dinner came up repeatedly as a pivotal moment. "That was when I knew," said one woman in a 1990s interview. "That was when I understood that we had been lied to about everything. About America, about the war, about our own government. The Americans gave us turkey when our own government had given us sawdust bread. That tells you everything you need to know about which system worked and which failed." The story of German female POWs and their Thanksgiving dinner encapsulates a larger truth about World War II. America defeated Germany not just through military force, but through the crushing weight of industrial abundance. The same factories that produced bombers and tanks also produced enough food to feed prisoners lavishly. The same logistics system that supplied armies across oceans also ensured that POW camps in Louisiana had turkey on Thanksgiving. Germany's total war mobilization, for all its efficiency and ruthlessness, could not compete with an American economy that could wage global war and still maintain prosperity at home.
The women who cried over Turkey in November 1945 were mourning more than the loss of their country's war. They were mourning the loss of their world view. Everything they had believed about German superiority and American weakness had been disproven by a plate of food. The generosity of the enemy was more devastating to Nazi ideology than any propaganda could have been. You cannot maintain belief in your superiority when your enemy feeds you better than your own government ever did. In the end, the Thanksgiving dinner achieved what years of bombing and combat could not. It made German soldiers question everything they had fought for. A feast served with kindness accomplished more than any interrogation. The American Guards and Red Cross volunteers who served turkey to crying German women probably didn't realize they were conducting psychological warfare of the most effective kind. They were simply following American values. On Thanksgiving, everyone eats, even your enemies.